My name is Lamar Hawkins. My partner Heather Macri, our paralegal esteemed Sonora Rose. We do bankruptcy work, and the purpose of talking today is to hopefully make it so that you don't have to see us some point in the future. This is a how to avoid ever seeing us, even though we're swell people, nice to meet, how to avoid us over the future. There's some things that we've learned over the years and things that have happened to clients way too many times that could have been avoided if they would have just been a little bit more forward thinking and a little bit better planning before. And usually it's at the startup of a company when a lot of these things have to start. So as we change slides, I'm going to make a beep sound, make Heather happy.
And also feel free to ask questions as we're going. It's better if this is interactive. So
yeah, yep. we can play with it as we go. I like our comics on every one of these. They're great. First and foremost, and I know this sounds a little self-serving because we are lawyers. The first thing in the creation of your business venture, whatever it is you're trying to do with your life, you got to get a lawyer, whether you want one or not. Everybody will think that their own lawyer is the best person in the world and the lawyer on the other side is the worst person in the world, and the reason for that is everybody usually makes bad decisions at the beginning and then they find the best person in the world later on. But if you start out with a lawyer, your life will be a lot happier. And the lawyer that you normally start out with is the kind of lawyer that's going to help you with the creation of your entity. Whatever your business venture is, it's got to have some form of legal creation, or if you don't, it's going to be you personally. And most of our goal is to keep it so that you don't have your own personal behind on the hook for some fallout that happens from your business. If you don't create the legal entity, you won't have the ability for that protection. Now, fortunately, coming up in a couple of these Workuities coming down the road, one of our partners, Phil Ruprecht, who's sitting back there, and Joe Schenk in our office will be talking specifically about this topic of the creation of the legal entity. As you can see, there's various forms that it might take: a partnership, a C Corp, an S Corp, or an LLC. LLC being the most recent creation of law that's in existence out there, and the most common that people create these days. But there are lots of reasons for each one of these forms. So don't just immediately assume, oh, I like LLCs, so it's a cool thing. See if that's the right form for what it is that you're creating. And for every creation that you make, particularly when it comes to LLCs, an LLC is only as good as the operating agreement that it has. And when we first see somebody who's had an LLC that's been in existence for several years, and our first question is, send us your operating agreement, and their response is, what's an operating agreement? We know that they have a complete piece of crap LLC. It is doing them almost no good because they don't have any of the things that are necessary that the operating agreement will get for them. Or maybe they send us something and it's a one-page operating agreement. Well, they have a piece of crap LLC. Congratulations. They probably got it off of some online form somewhere, and it's really not very good, and it's not giving them any protection. So your entity is only going to be as good as the operating agreement that you create for it, and that's why you need the lawyer, because we have the experience of knowing what to stick in those and what not to stick in those. But your lawyer is going to help you with the creation of your business, your contracting with whatever your customers, vendors, whatever suppliers are, and then hopefully somewhere down the road you avoid this, but at some point something bad happens. You need litigation advice. You got to have that person to pick up the phone and talk to say, hey, I just got sued by so-and-so, what do I do? And maybe your business lawyer is not the person who's going to help you with that, but your business lawyer should be able to get you in touch with the person who can help you with that. If you don't have that initial point of contact, your next thing is popping on the internet and Googling business advice for such and such. You're going to be searching in the dark. Start off today with a good business connection, and then you can have the good advice for the next issue that arises.
Yeah, I mean, we can't stress this enough. I know at the beginning of starting a business, a lot of times you don't have a lot of money, and so people don't want to spend the money on hiring a lawyer to create an operating agreement. First of all, it's very affordable. Creating these operating agreements can be done for a few $1,000s. Especially if you're looking for one that's fairly simple and flexible. It is a thing that you can do at the beginning that costs $1,000, $2,000 and will save you heartache and hundreds of thousands of dollars if you get into litigation or some type of dispute with your fellow members. So before we go on, I cannot stress enough that it's important to hire a lawyer, look at all the legal angles and aspects of the business, make sure that you've got everything in place and have an operating agreement that you understand and can use and is functional.
Right, it's not just between you and the outside world, it can be between you and your fellow partners, owners, whatever you want to call it, depending on the form of entity that you have. Fights can happen amongst you, and you need to have decided what you're going to do when fights come up, and how ties are broken, and that sort of thing.
Well, do you need an operating agreement if you're a one-person company?
Yes, yes. Common misconception or misbelief is that you don't. Well, it's just me. Well, then make it just be you, because frankly, that's where the liability is going to rest, is right on your doorstep if you don't have an operating agreement. It's to protect you not only with your partners, but also with the outside world. And without the operating agreement, you're not protected.
Because there's a doctrine, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, where you can pierce the corporate veil. Now they say corporate veil, but LLC veil would apply the same way here. And basically they can, even if you have formed some type of entity, get to you and your personal assets if they can show that essentially the entity was a scam or that it was set up for some purpose to defraud. Having these corporate formalities certainly doesn't mean that you don't have a fraudulent purpose, but it adds that extra layer of protection if someone does try to pierce the corporate veil, for you to show that, hey, I have observed formalities, I have an operating agreement, I have all of these documents in place.
Thank you. Second, get an accountant/CPA. Now, this is usually a function of how sophisticated you are as an accounting person. I was talking to a friend the other day about a business venture that he had, and I said, can you download from your Quickbooks your P&L and your balance sheet from the most recent month? So I don't have Quickbooks. How are you running your accounting? I've got an Excel spreadsheet. Oh my gosh, you're ridiculously unsophisticated, because QuickBooks, frankly, is amazingly easy to use for people that really know almost nothing about accounting. But assess your own capabilities. If you are completely deficient in handling your bookkeeping system, you may want to have somebody run your entire books offline or outside of your office on an as-needed basis for the actual day-to-day stuff, and that's fine. And frankly, a bookkeeper is not that expensive, and it's horribly expensive when it's not run properly, because you're doing a bunch of work and you're not sending out bills, and as a result, nobody's making payments to you, so you're working for free. If you want to work for free, give me a call. I got lots of things I want to send you to do. But if you don't want to work for free, make sure you got either yourself or outside help with bookkeeping. That's the day-to-day stuff. You got to have the CPA kind of behind the scenes for when you get to tax time, though. Some bookkeepers are sophisticated enough to do tax work. Talk to them when you first interview them to see if you want to hire them. But you got to have both of those levels, both for all the day-to-day accounting and then for the ultimate tax time. And on a periodic basis, for most entities, you've got various reportings that have to be done, whether it's withholdings on a payroll basis, or if it's quarterly reports to whatever governmental agency controls you. There's a lot of levels of accounting work that has to be done. So QuickBooks is my high recommendation. If you know absolutely nothing about accounting, it's a cheap program for cost. You can get it online or on your computer. You can learn it pretty easy. There's all sorts of tutorials that are out there. But if that's not your thing and you just don't have that capability, recognize your weakness and go to somebody else to make sure it's done. Don't have the first call to your lawyer be, hey, I got sued by so-and-so and he owes me a bunch of money. Well, download this information from your accounting system. Oh, well, I've got it in an Excel spreadsheet. Is that good enough? I know that's going to be a really heinous piece of litigation when I find that for the answer. You also have things like state and federal licensing, withholding, payroll, sales, income tax. When it comes to licensing, your accountant or CPA can be your best friend for preparing reports. If you're not sophisticated enough to be able to do that, they usually are. And when it comes to withholdings and making payroll withholdings, those are huge for your accountant or CPA to be able to be working with you. So, if you don't know somebody, find somebody. If you don't know somebody after you find somebody, ask somebody. And if you don't know, and if you still don't know anybody, give us a call. We can tell you some people that are great. Have no allegiance to them whatsoever, and I can give you 10 names of people that are great. But I can also give you 10 names of people that don't go to. One of the real sad things from our side of the table is when somebody walks through the front door about, oh my gosh, I got to file bankruptcy because everything's in a horrible situation, and I ask for the accounting information, they say, well, let me get that from my accountant. And then when I see what they get from the accountant, I'm like, they have a bad accountant. The accountant is who caused them to be talking to me. because they're not giving them good information. So you got to make sure you get somebody that actually knows what they're doing for your industry, because every industry has specialty issues. Make sure that you know somebody that can do what you do. Okay?
Yeah, we see this a lot. I mean, a lot of times when people come in to talk to us about bankruptcy, the accounting is in a shambles. And yeah, choose someone who specializes. If you're doing something with medical billing, you probably need someone who understands insurance payment rates and things like that. So after get a lawyer, get an accountant or a CPA is really definitely the number two.
Number two step. Licensing. As I alluded, licensing is something that you want to be talking with your accountant about, your lawyer about. Some businesses, you have to have a license to operate, and I'm shocked at how many times I talk to somebody in an industry that has to have a license and they don't have a license. For instance, if you're doing contracting work and you're out there building houses and whatnot, and you don't have a contractor's license, you can't sue. So if you really like working for people for free, great, go out and work for people for free. But if you ever don't get paid, you're not going to be able to sue anybody. So you're never going to get the recovery when things go bad. And getting a license isn't that complicated if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, you probably shouldn't be doing that business in the first place. And most licenses are, as a result, easy to obtain if you know what you're doing, critical to obtain if you want to get recovery. Some businesses don't need a license at all. Every business that I've seen, though, needs at least an operating license for a city or state level, depending on what states they happen to be working in. So if my office is only in Phoenix and I only do one set of things in the location of Phoenix, it's possible that the only license I need is a City of Phoenix license. That's possible. Your lawyer can tell you that. Candidly, if you go on the state's website, you can figure that out for yourself. But if you think you have a business that needs 0 licenses, you're probably wrong. Every license more than likely needs at least 1 license, which is just a city operating license. And the fees associated with that are not very, very high as you're paying your license fees every year, if that's the only kind of license you need. Okay, questions about licensing? All right, taxes. Always fill out the tax forms on time and file the tax forms on time, even if you can't afford to make the tax payments. The problem that we always see in the bankruptcy world is this is the first place where businesses rob somebody, is they don't pay their taxes. Why? Because there's nobody that's showing up on your door or writing nasty letters to you saying, pay me the bill today for what I just sent and sold you yesterday. It takes a long time for the taxing authority to get around to knocking on your door. So what do people do? They don't pay over the withholding taxes from the employee wages. They don't file their tax return on time. They don't pay the taxes that they owe on time. They don't pay their own withholding taxes when they're getting their paycheck every month. They think, oh, I'm just a sole member LLC and I can just pay myself as a draw and I don't ever have to pay taxes. No, not so fast. Yes, you do. And if you're not doing it, you're going to have horrible penalties that are going to land on your head when you don't do that. So an absolute is always fill out the tax forms and always file them on time. If you can't pay the tax when due, that's the trigger point for you to assess whether you should be doing this business at all. Because if you can't pay that tax, you probably are not making money doing what you're doing. Think about that. Start talking to your accountant, start talking to your lawyer whether you should be getting out of that business. When you do fall behind on paying taxes, that's one of the primary reasons we see people is they've fallen behind on paying their taxes. Know that for the most part, taxes are not going away in bankruptcy. They're going to haunt you. Most taxes, even though you think, okay, my lawyer said that if I make this LLC, the tax liability is the responsibility of the LLC and I don't owe it personally. Most taxes, that's not true. Most taxes you do actually owe personally as well. So falling behind on the taxes is a temptation when you don't have the bucks to pay, but it's a horrible thing to you personally. Because that vendor that you just bought widgets from, they probably don't have a personal liability to you unless you've signed a personal guarantee. The taxing authority probably does. But you pay the person that screams the most first, so as a result, you're paying that vendor and you're not paying the taxes, and tomorrow you have a personal problem. Okay? Questions on taxes? All right. Negotiating for credit. When you start up your company, oops, not forward. When you're starting up your company, your first big hurdle is how do I afford to pay and get myself going, and how can I borrow, and how can I get a line of credit and that sort of thing. Banking a relationship and getting a banker that you can pick up the phone and talk to is so key to being able to run a business easily. When you are working with what I call the mega banks, and you can't pick up the phone and talk to a personal banker, you've got a personal problem because you can't get service the way you probably need right when you start a business. I, as a result, recommend going to smaller banks when you're a smaller company. They will give you better service, and you probably need that better service to get going. But you'll see quickly that the bigger banks usually give you a better rate than the smaller banks do. And so you'll be tempted to go for that better rate. Always recognize that anything that they say to you for the first get-go, what it's going to cost you, is probably not their ultimate answer. Rates are almost always negotiable if you talk with the banker about it. Terms are almost always negotiable if you talk with your banker about it. The one that I really like to see never be on the table is personal guarantees. We talked about creating this nice entity to protect you personally from being sued if something goes bad. If you sign a personal guarantee, you jump right over the entity and have personal liability. The banker's always going to want you to sign a personal guarantee. That's almost always negotiable. And if you can ask, hey, can I avoid signing a personal guarantee than this? Oh, sure, I'm sorry, that was just my standard form. Well, look at that. You just saved exposure by just asking a question. Interest rates, likewise. Hey, you said it was a 5.5%. The guy down the street said that from his bank said 4%. Can you beat that? Oh, yeah, sure, happy to. Wow, I just saved 1.5 for a conversation. Finally, when it comes down to the actual documentation with your banker, they just slam you a whole bunch of forms and just expect you to sign them in one, quick, fast sit-down session without you reading the documents. Please don't ever do that. Read through every single tedious word and every single tedious document that the banker gives you. Because a lot of the times the conversation that you just had with them about, well, how about no personal guarantee? Oh, look, in the forms that they just handed me, there's a personal guarantee slid in there. And if I had just signed it, I would have given them a personal guarantee. Oh, so sorry, didn't mean to put that form in there, is what the banker will say. Yeah, he probably did mean to slide the form in on you. But if you look at the documents, you won't do that. If you read through the minutia, you'll see if all the terms that you negotiated are actually in there. And if they're not, hey, we talked about 4% interest. This says 5.5%. What's the scoop? Oh, sorry, my boss said it had to be 5.5%. Yeah, I want 4%. Go back and talk to your boss. Oh, okay. And then suddenly you get the better interest rate.
Yeah, and make sure you understand the documents. Ask questions. This is another place where if you have an attorney or an accountant, they can kind of help guide you through the documents and let you know what's standard, what's not. Make sure that you understand the agreements that you're signing and that you understand what your liability is.
Yes, so much. Employees. Now, we just did our firm did a Workuity on employee issues, and we're going to do another one, I think, coming up on this issue as well. Employees are where you run into most of your liability problems. If you think of yourself as the employee, it's pretty easy to understand, no pay, no play. Well, your employee is going to think the same way. They're not going to want to work for free. And if you're not paying them, you may very likely have a personal exposure for what you're not paying your employee. And even worse, you might not just owe the amount that you owe your employee, you might have some doubling or tripling of the amount that you owe your employee when you don't pay your employee when you're supposed to pay. So the damages can chalk up really fast. And another checkpoint for you is, if the company can't afford to pay the employee, maybe this business should not be operating. Maybe I should be doing something else. Hiring and firing of employees, that is a whole plethora of problems if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't have a good employee handbook and all that sort of thing. That's why employment law is such a mega industry right now, because we do try to protect the employees. So on this issue, another reason why you absolutely need to have a lawyer on your back, so that you're making sure that you're doing what you need to when you're hiring and firing employees, when you're paying, when you're not paying, and all that sort of stuff. And maybe you've got some contracts with employees, some of those kinds of things. You're going to quickly see you need some sophisticated help on your end to protect you from your employees, or you're going to create personal liability to yourself. Okay? Questions on that one? If you want to get the other Workuity on that issue, we can email that to you as well.
It's on our website, actually.
It's on
you can go on our website or on our Facebook page and watch it there. You can watch the entire bit, or you can watch, we also have it in a form that's broken up into segments. So, but I'm happy to direct you to it. I'm just letting you know it is out there.
Great.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about marketing. The big question here is, marketing can ultimately make your business successful, but you have to be smart about how you're doing it. This is something that can also be a problem for a business, because if you're putting a lot of money into marketing and it's not bringing in a return, then it's not helpful. So the big question at the start is, do you want to do it yourself or hire an expert? Now, if you're going to do it yourself, we always tell people you need to make time to learn how to market, to create a marketing plan, to learn about SEO, to look at what others in your industry are doing that you think is good or bad, so that you have a full marketing plan and you're not just sort of doing just one thing. I think it's easy for businesses.
Who knows what SEO means? I'm shocked. Oh, we got a couple of nods. Okay. Tell them SEO, because I didn't know.
Search engine optimization. It's basically looking at the back end of the website, looking at the content that you're posting, making sure that it's backlinked appropriately, making sure that you're using keywords so that when people are doing Google searches, you're at the top. Also, generating fresh content on your social media and your website also helps drive you higher in Google search results. Now, it's always hard to say exactly what's driving SEO, because as we all know, Google and Facebook change the algorithms all the time, and they're not always releasing what those algorithms are. But there are certainly ways to kind of do your research, figure this out, look at what's working, and make sure that you're incorporating these things into the marketing that you're doing. Now, that's obviously on the electronic side. I think a lot of times businesses focus very much on that. It makes a lot of sense. It can drive business, it's very affordable, it's very modern. But don't forget the sort of in-person marketing that's also very important. Are you joining professional and trade associations? Are you meeting people? Are you calling people in your industry and taking them out to lunch? Are you showing that you are a thought and knowledge leader as opposed to just another business selling a product? And how are you selling it? Are you selling it in a way that's authentic to you and your product? I know this is a little outside of the scope of us as attorneys, but we've really seen marketing either make or break a business. It can be a giant expense that pays off in spades. It can be a giant expense that ultimately tanks the business. And if you are going to hire a professional, make sure that you're setting metrics and you're having meetings and that those metrics are being met. Or if they're not the right metrics, that you can sort of take a pause and figure out what those metrics should be. It's always hard to measure what you're getting out of marketing, but there should be some measurable return. Even if you've got, in our business, we are very client facing, but when clients come in, we ask them, how'd you hear about us? Did you see us on the website? Did you see us on social media? Did you hear about us from a friend? And track your referral sources. You'll be amazed to find out where your referral sources actually are, and that also helps you sort of tailor your marketing. The other thing is that in certain industries, there are ethical rules and considerations about how you can and should market. As attorneys, there are certain things that we cannot say in marketing. There are certain types of marketing that really aren't the best idea. So think about your service and product and make sure that you're not violating any of your industry standards or industry rules. Physicians, if you're selling a medical device, if you're selling drugs. I also do a lot of healthcare law, so I sort of think in that manner. But just make sure that what you're putting out there is not, you can puff in advertising, but it's not crossing a line. Because that's another way that you can create liability for yourself. So, hiring a professional or doing it yourself, just make sure you know what you're doing, okay? Communication. This is the one where I always say everything that you write, write as if it's going to be read aloud back to you in a deposition for you to answer questions about what you really meant. It sounds funny until you're sitting in that deposition and they're reading your April 3rd email and asking what you really meant by that string of expletives. I know because I sat next to those clients, and it's always a good time. So I always tell people, know your audience, be clear and concise. If it's not something you want to put in writing, don't. We still have telephones, use them. Telephones also sometimes are the best way to ask for things. If you need to call someone up and ask for a favor, ask for an extension, ask for a payment plan, the email's not going to get you real far. So think about the modalities of communication and what works. Think about when you're communicating with clients, even though they can drive you nuts, think about the image that you want to project. Think about how you would feel as a customer getting that email. We all have unreasonable clients, it happens. But just kind of think before you email. And again, it will be read aloud back to you in deposition.
On this topic, I'll use my wife and throw her under the bus here because she's not here. She's notorious for text. If you try to call her and she doesn't want to talk to you, she will just not ever talk to you, and you can't leave a voice message with her. If she says, if it's important, they'll send me a text. That is, if you look at our hierarchy on this, that is completely backwards. If it's important, you should have a face-to-face conversation with somebody. If it's meaningless almost, that's when it's by text. That hierarchy is what creates personalization between you and people. If you do as much as you can possibly face-to-face, you'll have the best connections possible. Telephone call, second. Letter, because it's formal, third. Email, because it's informal, next. And text is frankly most of the time gibberish. Now I know anybody that's under the age of 30 probably sees it the exact opposite of that, but I'm telling you, think of it the other way and think of the impression that you're giving to the people that you're talking with.
The other thing to think about in terms of communications is documentation. If you do end up getting into litigation down the road, you need to have documentation about what was talked about before you entered into the contract, during the contract term, and after, when things are going badly. So you do need to keep records. So make sure however you're communicating, you're keeping copies. Don't write a letter, trash it, and then send it so the only copy is in someone else's hands. I know this sounds very basic, but we see it a lot. So make sure that you are keeping records of communication.
What do you suggest doing, I mean, with face-to-face contact being the number one, what do you suggest doing to kind of keep both the record and then?
Follow up with a confirming letter.
I say
or
follow up
email.
with a confirming letter or email. If you've talked about something important enough that it is some sort of modification of the contract or you think it's important, put it in an email, put it in a letter to follow up after the conversation. You can even put, and follow up to our telephone conversation that we had on June 2nd, whatever. Sometimes that's helpful. It will be helpful down the line. If you think it's important, follow that gut instinct and make sure you're documenting. Just make sure your documents are something you don't mind reading again later.
With nice thank yous and that sort of
Yep.
thing to make the person happy with you.
And collections. Stay on top of your AR balance. This is not the place to be an ostrich and stick your head in the sand if money is not coming in. This is also a place where having a good accountant or CPA is going to really help you. Make sure you understand your AR. Make sure you understand how much aging AR you have versus new AR. Make sure you understand the different time periods. As AR gets old, it basically becomes uncollectible. We run into a lot of businesses who they sort of intellectually know that they have high AR, but they don't really know what that number is, and they really don't know what that number is when it's broken down over time. This is something critical for you to know and understand in your business. It is something critical for you to talk about with your accountant or bookkeeper on a monthly basis.
So we just had a question about what is AR? Because that's
Accounts receivable. In other words, I give a service, I send you a bill, and I'm going to use our industry, I send you a bill, that's our account receivable. If you pay it, then it's no longer AR, you've paid it. If you don't pay it, it becomes AR, and the longer you don't pay it, the more it ages. And again, it is really hard to collect things as they get older.
I should also mention that if you're an internet merchant, taking care of chargebacks is really important.
Yes, absolutely. Taking care of chargebacks is extremely important. You are legally required to do that. It's also a good business practice. That's something we talked about here too. Giving discounts for quick or immediate payment. If you've got a good paying client, it really is worth it to give them a discount periodically for that good quick payment, because those payments that come in right away or on time are worth more than the actual payment. I mean, that is going to keep your AR balances in a manageable place, and that really varies by industry. So again, it's important to have good accounting to kind of know what's standard with what you're doing. Keep track of it, give discounts for people who are paying on time. Doesn't really apply as much in the internet commerce world, but make sure that you're rewarding good behavior and that you're keeping a check on bad behavior. Do not let it pile up. We sometimes see AR balances that are just super, super high. And sometimes too, just picking up the phone. This is a place where picking up the phone works really well. Hey, I sent you some bills. I saw that you haven't been paying us, or something we need to talk about. Maybe this is someone who's struggling financially and you shouldn't be doing business with them. Maybe it's something as simple as they didn't get the bill. Sometimes our clients change email addresses. We send it out, we never hear anything, and we don't realize they're not checking that email anymore. I've had bills as simple as I call someone, I was like, hey, we haven't gotten a payment from you in a while and we're still doing work and we need to talk about it. And I realized they just haven't gotten the bill, or they got it and they just didn't open it because they were busy. And I can't tell you, they're apologetic and they pay your bill. and it's sort of it's an ended issue because now they're going to look out for it. So make sure that if the AR is piling up, and especially if it seems like a client where this isn't something that happens a lot, just give them a call. Find out if it's not working and you can afford it, put them on a payment plan. It's better to get those payments and reward the good behavior, see if the people who aren't paying have a reason, and eventually cut them off before it drains your business.
And if they're really, really bad at paying you, have them give us a call because they're probably going to be filing bankruptcy soon.
Unless we're representing you and then we have a conflict.
Yeah, we have a conflict. And we won't do it.
Be our good client. Yeah.
In the state of Arizona, what entitles me and what are the fundamental requirements that would enable me to be able to pursue collection items, non-collectible?
It helps to have a contract. I mean, this is a place where having a contract with appropriate language really helps because you can build those types of provisions into the contract. The contract can say your bill is due in 30 days. At 45 days, there's a late fee. At 60 days, we start charging interest. Those types of rights happen if you have a contract or written agreement in place that says that. It'll also say things like, if I have to sue you to recover, you also have to pay my attorney's fees and court costs. So this is a place where, again, talking to a lawyer and getting some good contracts up front are really going to save you heartache down the line because at least your rights are spelled out. If you don't have a contract, you can still essentially assert that you have an oral agreement and sue on that. But there's also quasi-contractual theories like unjust enrichment that says, hey, I provided you a benefit. Even though we didn't have a contract, you should pay me back essentially for that benefit. The problem with the quasi-contractual remedies is that they typically do not allow you to recover attorney's fees and court costs. So then you have to make this economic analysis of, is it worth pursuing this and paying all these fees and court costs for the amount? And that just really depends on the amount of the debt in your business. The other thing to think about is the person collectible? And there's never a magic formula for figuring that out, right? I mean, it's hard to know, is someone collectible? But there are ways to kind of look at that and evaluate it. And again, it's a comparison of the amount versus the debt. If someone is in bankruptcy too, don't always give up. We represent debtors, but I also have a background in doing creditor work. I did creditor work for a while. And, if someone's in bankruptcy, a lot of creditors just kind of throw their hands up and walk away and they don't do anything. There are, depending on the chapter of bankruptcy, different ways to see if there is some collection possibility. Filing a proof of claim, working with the trustee. Even if it's an unsecured debt, sometimes there is an opportunity to recover even a little bit. You're not going to always get dollar for dollar, but this is another place where an attorney, particularly a attorney who specializes in bankruptcy and collections, can help you. There are also firms who only do collections. I mean, you can hire a firm to go out and collect your AR. And depending on how much AR you have and the type of business you're in, that may or may not be a good decision. It also depends on how aggressive they're going to be and how that's going to be perceived in your business community. There's a lot of things to think about here. But the big takeaway is stay on top of it, know your numbers, now how old the AR is, and this is stuff that your accountant or bookkeeper should be able to tell you. These are really pretty simple reports to run.
How enforceable are the fees? So let's say you have a clause that says if you have to send them to collections or an external agency, legal, and they've signed that in the agreement, how enforceable are those fees versus the AR collections itself? Obviously, they would have to pay you what they owe.
It depends on the document that you've got, but let me give you from my practical perspective. I'm a lawyer, and I got a client that owes me money, and I send my client to somebody to collect my fees. I'm a lawyer. I will almost always have to resolve this in some fashion that's going to not result in the full payment of the receivable and not result in recovery of my attorney's fees, just to get it done. Because frankly, time is money too.
Sure.
And so while you may have a legal right that you might be entitled to your attorney's fees, you'll have a practical problem of trying to push it the whole way because is it really worth it?
Okay.
I always say if you owe me $5,000, you have a problem. If you owe me $500,000, I have a problem.
Sure.
It's very much relative.
I will say too, though, having a contract helps tremendously. We have a statute in Arizona, ARS 12341.01. The reason I know it is because we use it all the time. And it essentially says in a breach of contract action that you can recover attorney's fees for having to bring that action if you are the prevailing party. Now, prevailing party is probably not as cut and dry as it sounds. You can win the lawsuit, but maybe lose on a different issue. But having that in your contract sort of reinforces what's in the statute, and it gives you a much better chance. Whereas if you don't have it in the contract, then you're going to have to make these claims based on the statute. So this is a place where you have to sort of have it on both sides.
Gary.
He asked about collector fees. Collector fees are not enforceable.
Collector fees, right?
Right.
Right.
Question here. So what makes the individual uncollectible?
When they've seen me already and they've already filed bankruptcy. No, generally speaking, it's a, like Heather said before, it's a very sliding scale.
Yeah.
The whole, you owe me $500, you got a problem, $5 million, I've got a problem kind of thing. And it's individual or company specific too, because you can have somebody that's very liquid and very easy to collect from, or you can have somebody that's almost impossible to squeeze because there's nothing that's going to come out of that turnip. It's case by case specific, and so with your probably lawyer, when you're getting to the point of collection, you're going to assess whether it's worth to spend a bunch of money on lawyer fees to go after somebody, or to just cut the loss and move on and learn your lesson. Boy, I'll never work with that person again.
Yeah.
Boy, I'll never work with that type of person again. Boy, I'll make sure that I do credit checks up front.
Yeah.
Boy, I'll make sure I get signed contracts up front. I will stay on my ARs on a monthly basis so that they don't get so big. All of those things you learn the hard way most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, we can all think of examples of huge companies that failed and became uncollectible that, you know, a month before you wouldn't have thought of that.
You mentioned creditworthiness and doing credit checks. Do you guys have a recommendation on the route? Dun & Bradstreet's obviously really popular, but is there a legal viewpoint on that?
You know, there's a lot of websites that can do it for you right now. It's very internet driven. This is me personally. This is not as a lawyer. This is me personally. I have a rental property. I want to get a tenant. I go to a website that runs a credit check and a tenant worthiness of that person for $20. I've got data to know whether I want to rent to that tenant or not from an economic perspective.
Sure.
Very easy to do. I just need a little bit of data about them. Likewise, you can do that with pretty much any company or any individual for any arena, right on the internet.
Okay.
You don't want to spend a bunch of money with lawyers doing credit checks.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's that website?
Send me an email. I don't look at it often enough to know, but it's like Renters Check or something like that. Send me an email, I'll give it to you.
Dun & Bradstreet is not a bad option, though. It is sort of the gold standard of those types of checks. So if that's what you're utilizing, you're probably utilizing something that's going to meet your needs.
Is D&B the only place as far as, because I got a call from
No.
Nope.
No, there's a myriad of places.
There's a
Because they called me up saying, I want $1,500 in order to let you fix your credit or whatever, and I said, I don't need
Yeah.
D&B.
Most of those phone calls are people wanting to get
Those are
$1,500.
marketing. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't recommend those. Okay, this is my personal pet peeve. You've got a bunch of people that you like in this world that you would recommend your friends to. Do that. Recommend your friends to people that you like. Likewise, when you need somebody in your life for whatever it is, like if I got a sore tooth, I'm going to ask my friend who's a good dentist in the area, because that has got more likelihood that I'm going to get a dentist that I like. Do that with other people too, with your friends. Talk about who they like and frankly who they don't like. So you stay away from somebody that's going to give you a problem, whether it's your lawyer, your accountant, your marketer, your customers, your vendors, whomever. Share the wealth with people that you know.
And find a good fit. Your friends are more likely to find a good fit for your business need. You know, you can go to Cravath, you can go to the biggest law firm in America, and they're going to charge you crazy fees. And if they're just setting up your LLC, you're not really getting the value there. You know, you can go to a smaller local firm like us, and we can do it for a quarter of the price. You know, so make sure, you know, don't get caught up in the big names. Use the referrals, use your network of friends, and make sure that the professionals you're working with are people you like, people that you can communicate with, people that you understand. You know, just, I hate to say, like, don't get impressed by the fancy conference rooms and all that stuff. You know, go to professionals that your friends recommend who are a good fit to your business. Interview more than one person. It's totally fine.
Even with lawyers, interview
Yep.
several.
You need to have a lawyer that you trust and that you can talk to and have an open dialogue. This is not a relationship where you want to hide anything. This is a relationship where you want to have someone that you can talk to like a normal person. So make sure you find that, okay? All right, any other
Any other
questions?
questions?
I have a quick question on personal guarantees. So
Mhm.
I'm a business broker in Chicago for about 6 or 7 years, and was fortunate to be able to put together, work on about 50 successful transactions. I mean, to market a lot more than that. And my experience is that kind of at a certain level, enterprise value or revenue, that's going to be required for most people to acquire a company or to get a loan. And then over a certain threshold of value, it's less likely to be acquired. What's kind of your experience on what that threshold is and how successful you can be for smaller companies?
Company specific. Basically, what you're talking about is whether somebody's an accredited investor or not. That is more of an SEC issue and what they can invest in, what levels of sophistication they have, what levels of net worth that they have. So if you get somebody who's an accredited investor from SEC purposes, you know that they've met a certain level of sophistication. But I remember the day when I realized, holy smokes, I'm an accredited investor because I satisfy the criteria, but I don't feel like an accredited investor at all because I don't feel like going out and buying a piece of a company without somebody really telling me what's going on. It becomes really specific for what you're actually invested in. So if I go down to my bank and say, hey, I want to buy into XYZ company 50%, will you loan me $1 million to do it? I may have the credit worthiness to borrow $1 million, but I don't have sophistication to know how to run XYZ company. Those are two totally different issues. And your banker is going to tell you really fast if you're not capable of doing what you're trying to do.
So on a larger scale, multiple investors in a company, it's not going to be required that.
On a larger scale, you're almost always going to be hitting SEC requirements for public offerings, and are they giving you a prospectus for the investment? Unfortunately, while we don't do securities work, 'cause that's a whole other area of law, people commonly step into that problem when they're like, hey, let me get some of my buds together, we're going to start up this business venture, and I'll get 20 from you and 10 from you and 50 from you, and we'll all get together and make this group. They may have just created a public offering and may have just violated SEC requirements when they did that because they don't know who's actually making the investment. So that's one of those things, whenever you're getting a group together and you don't have a lawyer that's at your side doing the business documentation to make sure the guy who's starting it is not violating SEC law, somebody may have a lawsuit problem down the road when the business fails. And
it really is a sliding scale. They look at your personal financial statement, your business's financial statement versus whatever you're trying to acquire. How much liquidity do you have? What type of assets do you have? The depreciation levels of those assets. There's just so many factors that it's hard to say there's a cutoff. Obviously the higher net worth, the less likely there'll be a personal guarantee unless this acquisition is a huge reach. So it's just one of those things that there's a lot of factors.
Very sliding.
Anybody else?
Lovely.
All right, well, thank you guys so much. We'll be here for a few minutes after as well to answer questions.
Business cards up here.
Yep.
So if you want to take a card and shoot me that email, and I'll be able to give you that website.
And Austin, what do we have up for next month?
Next month is Sean Aiken.
That's right, we have Sean
Arbitration.
Aiken, and he's going to talk about arbitration, mediation, and other alternative dispute resolution options. He's an excellent speaker, so if you can come by, please do. Thank you, guys.